Thank you. The Nowen reading I just finished reading ended with these words: "We cannot bring good news on our own. I have found over and over again how hard it is to be truly faithful when I am alone. I need my siblings to pray with me, to speak with me about the spiritual task at hand, and to challenge me to stay pure in mind, heart, and body." So, you and I may not use some of the language that Nowen uses, but I'm prepared to suggest that we too need one another, just as much as the Christian disciples did, just as much as Nowen did in his community, because it is then that we are able to stay true to our best selves. Because no one needs to carry that backpack all alone. For some years now in Unitarian Universalist circles, we've been using the language of shared ministry. Even when a congregation works with a minister full-time, which this one currently doesn't have, but will have soon, is the hope, even when there is a full-time minister, there is a growing appreciation for the reality that all congregations are, in truth, lay-led. Some happen to do the work with a professional minister alongside to help them in their work. But most of what happens in this congregation isn't done by me or Reverend Victoria. It's done by you. And we're beginning in our tradition, I think, to begin to wrestle with the real tension between individuals and community. This can be tricky work in a UU congregation when many of us are eager to define ourselves by differentiating ourselves from other religious paths. But we are here in a community. It's my belief that enlightenment or insight are not solitary sports. We need one another. And if we don't believe in our heart of hearts that that's true, we wouldn't be gathering here today in person or online. For those of you at home online, if you didn't believe that, you'd be using your computer to watch a cat video right now. A congregational website I came across says this about the motivations people have for attendance at our congregations. People come to our churches to be lifted out of the ordinary, to be drawn up from the mundane, and to seek relief from the omnipresent materialism of our culture. People come into religious community to wrestle with life's ultimate questions, looking for a place to seek meaning about living and dying and the spaces in between. People are looking for a way to make a difference in the world, to live a life that matters. In our society of frequent relocations and diminished family support, people also come to our congregations to find friends and community. They come for a sense of intimacy and a safe place in which they can be accepted. They come looking for a place to belong. Well, that may be why some people show up, but personally, I started going to a UU church because I wanted to serve on a committee. Because there were lots of opportunities to do that. But if we do it right, and if we get it right, our congregations can help us do important work, the work of supporting one another in our journey for intimacy and ultimacy. We can do it for ourselves and for one another when we're here together. Congregations are a place where we are reminded that we need to do it together. But there's a problem, because congregations are made up of humans, and they fall short, and they don't deliver what people are asking for. They try, we try, but we don't always deliver the goods. And we find, sadly, that some people, after an additional burst of enthusiasm, drift slowly away because their expectations haven't been met. Some time ago, when I was studying for the ministry, I took a course that helped me understand the connection between theology and the way congregations and denominations organize. I considered that in our tradition, there is no one single theological outlook, which led me to believe briefly that perhaps we are destined to be disorganized. But then I thought about our values, our belief in equity and justice, and our focus on the interdependence of all existence, and that most of us could, with translation, perhaps see us having, if not, as Channing believed, the seed of the divine in us, then at least the potential to be expressions of the divine. Theologically speaking, we are not a very top-down group. And if our congregations are to serve as expressions of those beliefs, then the way we organize and the programs we support should reflect our values. For if we are to have institutional integrity, if our values and principles matter to us, we'll need to ensure there is a place for all members, long time and more recently arrived, to come together, where people can make meaning of their lives and find deep and abiding connections with others. It means we won't presume what answers others will need. And it means, and this may be a little inconvenient, that each of us will need to be open to the possibility that things may change based on the wisdom and contribution of those we meet. I've heard people say, I suspect you have too, I've been a Unitarian my whole life, but I didn't know it until 5 years ago or whatever. And I'd say I understand the point of that statement, and I understand the sentiment of that statement, but I actually disagree, because I believe that to be a Unitarian Universalist is to belong to and associate with a congregation or a group of people who are doing the work. It's possible to hold Unitarian ideas or to be a Universalist thinker without association with a group of people. But I believe that it's in coming together in our communities where we struggle to reflect our collective values, and in communities that hold us responsible for doing the work that we say we are committed to. I believe that's where we actually become Unitarian Universalists. It's here in community that each of us does the work of exploring meaning and of becoming Unitarian Universalist. James Luther Adams, I quote him somewhat frequently. I think this might be my 4th time since I've been here. James Luther Adams, a great Unitarian theologian of the last century, said people come to church for intimacy and ultimacy. They come to have lives of meaning and to find others who can know them and who they can know, so that together they can explore fully what it means to be alive, to be human. We live in an age where no one is legally required to attend any particular church or church at all, and the choices we make about where we belong are, or can be, are expressions of our theology. But to do that sort of work and to make the connections I'm talking about is to risk something. It's to risk being open with others. It's to risk sharing our deepest selves with one another. And it's to risk having someone say, I think we can do better. Being in deep community means we must be open to change. This kind of openness is not easy. It will lead us to lands where we are strange to others and others are strange to us. Congregations of friendly people are not enough. If we are personally open to change and challenge, we will, at least some of the time, be pretty uncomfortable. If we are open to change and challenge, so too must our congregations be, because unless our structures and institutions reflect our values and are open to change, things will be askew. So there it is, a challenge. In my previous work with the Canadian Unitarian Council, where I served congregations in Eastern Canada for 23 years, this was a challenge I made to all the congregations I engaged with. All of our congregations need to figure out ways to better live our theology and values into being, to minister effectively to one another and the world. It takes ongoing effort to do this work well. We need to enter into the kind of shared ministry that Nowen was talking about. I think for us to be authentically Unitarian Universalists, congregations need to develop and redevelop programs, practices, and outlooks that help long-time and brand new people to find a community of meaning. There is a pesky human tendency to resist change. Consciously or unconsciously, I think we all try to keep things the way that they were, because that feels comfortable. After all, it works for the people who are already here. But there are others who would find our liberal approach to theology life-affirming, who aren't here. And some who wouldn't find us comfortable, even though theologically they might match, because our patterns and our practices might unintentionally send the message that they don't belong. I don't think that any one person or any congregation actually wants to be inhospitable, but the reality is we are at times. The ways we have always done things may not be the way we need to be doing things now. This is our legacy, and it is our challenge. Ours is a tradition that has changed a great deal over time. 100 years ago, Unitarian and Universalist congregations were all explicitly Christian. Shifts and changes are part of our story. And they are one of the ways we have responded to the needs of people we've not yet met. Perhaps because the news of the world is often so hard, all of us, at least some of us, would prefer the comfort of sameness and what we know. But the reality is everything changes. It always has. Some changes we see and welcome, and others we would rather resist. Change isn't easy. It sometimes represents loss, and that's tough. But as we learned in Star Trek, and as the Borg asserted, resistance is futile. We need to make sure our congregations can be open to new people, that members are willing to risk meaningful engagement, and that each of us and all of our congregations are open to change. I think with great amusement of the ways in which I have been asked to change through my association with Unitarian Universalism. In my home congregation of Hamilton, I have resisted new ways of doing things. When I first joined that congregation, over 40 years ago now, they were a completely lay-led congregation with no professional minister. They met in a small renovated house, and they talked about moving to a bigger space, and I remember lamenting the loss of the backyard. And then they started talking about a minister, and I remember thinking, what in the world would we ever need one of those for? We feel comfortable dealing with the familiar. It feels safe to have great conversations with people who we know already think like us. But if we let the comfort of the familiar lull us into assuming all is well, we may well fail the communities that our values and our theology challenge us to be. Happily, I have some thoughts about, well, maybe not happily, happy for me. I have some thoughts about how we can meet the challenge. My thoughts, of course, are not the only useful ones, but I think they might serve as a starting point. What do you personally do when your values and hopes feel out of alignment with how you're acting in the world? I imagine most of us start this difficult work by taking an inventory. What is it we want from our life and our relationships? Where do we fall short of our aspirations? And then, if you're anything like me, you think of one or two little things that you can begin to do to find some starting points for moving into greater alignment. I will never get to the point where I can say absolutely everything I do is in perfect alignment with my values, because I'm human. Sometimes for me that's a problem, because sometimes for me perfection can be the enemy of the good, and I find myself getting stuck. It's easy to get stuck and struggle to appreciate the small steps, the little bits of progress we make. I see congregations struggling with this too. But if authenticity and integrity are worthy goals, we'll accept our imperfections and find a place to start. If our values, reflected in our principles, and I have for you later cards with the 8 principles on them that I will hand out at the end of the service. If our values reflected in our principles include concepts as they do, such as inclusion, compassion, community, encouragement, spiritual growth, and the inherent worth of each person, we've got a pretty good starting place for our considerations. And we can ask, how well are we collectively embodying these values? Something I've observed in myself and in many of the congregations I've worked with is there's a tension between individual and collective community needs. Your ideas for great worship might differ from mine. You might like different kind of music. Your choices about social justice work and the priorities that you would pick, I might think they're ill-advised. That's the way it happens when we come together. And those are all the ways in which we, with our different preferences and understanding, might find ourselves bumping into one another. But at our best, we can rise above those personal preferences and think about how the community can be its best self. When we do this, when we remember to think about the collective welfare rather than our own preferences, I think we're on the right track. It doesn't mean our personal preferences for music or styles of worship, for theological language or not, for community projects go away. But it does mean we have to ask ourselves what the group needs. I'm not talking about any one person being a pushover. That wouldn't put us in greater alignment with our values. But I am thinking about how beautiful it is when congregational life is a dance of give and take, and how lovely it is when someone can say, in this moment, I'm happy to defer to someone else's preference or their needs. My being stretched is good for me, and it's something I can do to honor another person's spiritual path. This congregation, I know, has asked questions about how you gather and organize, where you gather and organize. Feels like the last few years you've done nothing but ask those questions. Soon you'll be looking at the recommendation of a search committee regarding your next settled minister. In all of this, there are questions. Are you welcoming to others as much as you'd like to be? It seems like an obvious and useful area for reflection. Are we in alignment with our values? But it's not always done. When I was studying for ministry in seminary, I had a classmate who came from Washington, D.C. And he told us, completely unperturbed, of his congregation, I will not name it, there are many in the D.C. region, about the meetings that they had, where yelling and fist-pounding and name-calling were common. The rest of us in the room were quite taken aback, and we asked him how that was okay. And he said, well, that's just the way it is in Washington. He might be right. It might be true, sadly, and that was 15 years ago, what he described as typical in Washington. But I don't think those meetings really reflected who the congregation wanted to be. They might have reflected Washington culture. He described a congregation that wasn't, in my opinion, functioning with authenticity. Far from it. Most cases of congregational disconnect that I've encountered are not as extreme as that one. But if we do the work and we take an honest inventory of our practices, we will understand we have work to do. And that's okay. It's not easy. It can be downright difficult at times. But then again, I think we've all figured out that good work is often challenging. I love our congregations. I love this congregation. I love our liberal communities of faith that help people find companions for their journey. I love groups of people that witness to one another's lives and do it with compassion, and who are brave enough to call one another when help is needed to their higher selves. I love that our congregations and their members are not afraid to look at the world and to do the important work of justice making. I love that we can show the world through the choices we make about how we organize, assemble, and show up what it is that we believe. I love that we do this even when we find it difficult. For me, it feels significant that we do this together, that the First Unitarian Congregation of Toronto is a collection of people who ask those questions and do the work, sometimes each in their own way with their own skills, and that's okay. But I also am really always moved when I think that this morning and every Sunday morning and every Tuesday night when there's a committee meeting or whatever, that in other places across this country and North America most particularly, there are other Unitarian Universalist congregations meeting. Other groups of people are asking similar questions. What does it mean to live our values into being? How do our beliefs inform our ways of being in relationship with others, both within and without this community? Last week, a number of UU and other clergy gathered in Minneapolis. Wow. More than one was arrested. They were there witnessing to the violence and harm being caused to the people. The lessons that they have shared, the pieces I have read from those who are home and sort of processing what they've learned, what they have shared from their time there is the importance of building connections, of holding one another in care and asking the hard question, how shall my relationships and my actions reflect my most deeply held values? These are the questions we ask here, and our answers will shape our future. I think they're the questions that the world needs people to ask. I feel so fortunate to have found this faith, and I'm pretty passionate about passing it on in better shape than I found it for the next generation. I hope all of you know just how much this congregation can offer to the larger community, to the people you've not yet met. Thankfully, no one needs to carry that backpack of gear required for vital ministry alone. You can each carry a small pack. You can help one another, and you can invite others to join you in the journey. I'm so glad that you are doing this work here. I'm glad you're doing it together. And I'm glad to be a companion with you for at least a time as you do the work. Let's take a few breaths in silent reflection.